So we're going to talk about Teams live events, and a bit tongue-in-cheek here, the good, the bad, and the fairly ugly. For me, live events have been a big part of my work life. Certainly for the last 2 to 3 months, I've been working very heavily with a couple of the organisations that I work with. And we've hit some problems, and I'm not the only one. I've had a few conversations with people like Andy Talbot in the UK community as well, and we've both discussed some of the issues and the problems we've had with Teams. So before we get into that, let's talk about the sponsors, because these events don't happen without the sponsors. So thank you very much, these guys. If you get a chance, please do have a look at their website. And of course, we need to talk about our code of conduct. It's something that we don't do enough of sometimes at some of the events. So just bear in mind that, we want this to be an inclusive environment for everyone to work in. So a very quick bit about me. I'm a principal consultant for Trustmark, a gold partner in the UK. I've been involved in the community for a long time now, and I've been an MVP since 2016. And when I'm not doing this stuff, I'm playing with wood. So there's a few of my items there in the middle. Recently, I'm turning lots of wizards, which seems to be in the theme of Harry Potter with Jasper under his stairs earlier. So what are we going to talk about today? So we're going to cover why we should use live events and maybe why not. We're going to talk about how to set up the live event, the policies and the permissions involved. And we're going to cover off some of the announcements that came out of Ignite. I mean, there were some really good ones, and we'll go into some depth in those. We don't have lots of information, but I'm going to share what we can. We're also going to talk about some of the limitations, things like sharing transitions, presenter content, and some of the license limitations. And then we're going to talk about the ugly, external guest access, which frankly is the biggest blocker for live events going forward at the moment. So let's jump into live events. What is it? How do they work? And why should we be using them? So I'm going to give you the Microsoft definition, and this is as it exists on the docs.com today. Teams live events is an extension of Teams meetings and enables users to broadcast video and meeting content to a large online audience. And very much the focus of this is one-to-many. So, okay, we're going to adapt this as we talk on about the changes coming out of Ignite. But how do they work? So the main thing is we schedule, and we have a production with presenters. We have a producer that runs it. We can use an external app or device. We're not going to talk about that today. The content is then sent to the stream platform. It goes out across Azure Media Services, uses the content delivery network. And because of the way it uses this, that's up to a 20 to 30 seconds delay for the attendees. So this starts to answer why some of the things like Q&A can be quite interesting. So it's really important to understand that delay exists. But from a producer presenter point of view, you don't need to worry about it. One of the things I tell a lot of the presenters that I work with is, don't connect to your own stream, because that will just confuse you. So obviously, to produce these events, it's a bit more than just a team meeting. So each Teams live event needs a cast. Now, it's not a cast of thousands. I generally find that for the larger events, 3 to 4 people running the event is enough. And then obviously, as you scale up with more presenters, you'll have a few more people. So the important thing here is that producers and presenters have to use the Teams client on the Mac or PC. There's no mobile connection. There's no web browser option. So it's a full-on Team client install. The attendees, however, they can view on any device: mobile, web browser, full Teams client themselves. So that's the nicer side of it. So let's talk a couple of bits about those roles. So the first role is the producer. And the producer is basically in command of the event. They start the event, they stop it, they control what the attendees see. Key thing to understand here is they don't control what the attendees hear. Everyone who's connected to the backstage meeting, and we'll talk about the backstage meeting in a minute, their mics are live throughout. So you cannot turn off their mic. You can mute them, but obviously anyone can unmute and talk. So any of your producers and presenters need to understand what's happening there. The presenters have a slightly different view. They have basically a team meeting view. The key thing to see here is the pre-live indication, which turns to live, and we'll talk about how that affects them. And for them, screen sharing, things like that works exactly the same. And then we have our supporting cast. So I generally find it works well if we've got multiple speakers, having a slide wrangler, especially if they're handing over between each other. Sometimes that's a better experience. It does mean that each speaker has to either ask for the next slide, or you have to have key transition points that indicates when that should happen. And the other role there is the Q&A mod. So with live events, the audience can ask questions through the moderated Q&A chat, and we can choose to publish a public answer. We can privately reply. We can even ignore questions. And having that moderator who can monitor that and maybe pass a question to the speaker if needed, that's a good workflow. And then, of course, we've got the audience. So they can watch and listen. They can ask questions through Q&A, and it's important you understand that that needs to be enabled, and we'll talk about that when we go through setting up. But they do have this 20 to 30-second delay because of the stream, so that can impact when questions come in. They also can't unmute and ask questions, and they don't have the ability to just type in the chat. So obviously we have the Discord chat today. So you could look at using a separate system like Discord alongside live event. That would probably work quite nicely. In the same way that we're doing this today. But for the proper embedded experience, it would be nice to see that all in the client, which obviously we can't do currently. So the big question is really, why would you use Teams live events? Zoom's been around for a while, WebEx, etc. And a good example of that is money. So at the start of COVID, one of my clients was spending £44,000 a month on Cisco WebEx. Now that included what we would call a WebEx guided event, where we use a third party, and their third party producers basically run the same roles that we do in a live event. But obviously we can do that internally. You can do that with WebEx internally, but you're still going to pay your WebEx subscription and things like that. So by moving the majority of their events to Teams live events now, they've saved roughly 44,000 a month. So I mean, that's massive. This is a 70,000 seat organization, so obviously there's a fair investment in time and effort there for them. So we need to talk a bit about the service limits, because they're no surprises, there are some limits. So currently the maximum concurrent live events per tenant is 15. Now this was flexed during COVID up to 50. And I believe they recently extended that to the end of October. I don't know if it's been extended beyond that, I need to check. And likewise, the maximum duration, which the service limit is 4 hours, they did set that to 16 hours. And likewise, the maximum audience size is published limit is 10,000, but during COVID it's been 20,000. A couple of key restrictions there is organisers must have an Exchange online mailbox to allow them to schedule the event. Producers and presenters have to use the team client. We've talked about that. And the producer view is limited beyond 9 presenters. And what I mean here is that if 12 or 13 people connect to the backstage view with their cameras on, and the last person to connect is one of your presenters that you need to show a video, he may have dropped off the bottom of the list, which means you can't then select his camera. So you sometimes have to do a bit of jiggery pokery, get people to drop off and rejoin. It's not so bad if you're using a much bigger screen, because then the team's real estate takes up a bit more. So I've linked these specifications in the slides, and I'll be sharing them afterwards. So just a key one there around the what is a concurrent event. So the concurrent event is considered as soon as a producer. So anyone who's been assigned the producer role joins the event, that event is considered running, whether it's live or not. So as soon as that producer tries to join the 16th one, unless they've got the extended license, we'll receive an error. So up until we run out of the COVID expansion, you'll be good for 50, but then we're down to 15. A way around that is the advanced communication SKU. So this is currently available. The list price is $12, and frankly, any client who's on a good license agreement shouldn't be paying anywhere near that. But this add-on SKU basically bypasses that organizer beyond the 15 limit and takes them back up to 50. It allows live events to connect up to 20,000 attendees and to last for 16 hours. So basically, this is the COVID expansion, but on a license basis. Later this year, this advanced communication SKU is going to feed into some of the changes that are coming out of Ignite. So it's going to give us, 1,000 participants to an interactive Teams meeting. So currently you have a soft cap of around 300 in a normal Teams meeting. That cap's going to jump to 1,000. And again, that license is a per organizer basis, not for everyone who attends. And it also means you're going to be able to have a view-only add-on, effectively a live event off of a Teams meeting, which will allow you to extend that 1,000 user meeting to a further 20,000 people. It's going to enable some of the live events, registration and analytics, and the custom branded login. Again, we're going to go into some detail about those when we talk about the Ignite announcements. There's also a 35% discount on top of everything else on that SKU until the end of January. That was announced at Ignite as well. So we talked about the why and the what they're for. So it's how. So I wanted to take you through a deep dive of how we control a lot of the live events platform, how we schedule a live event, how we start, run through it and stop. So we do have a short video at the end of this that shows the live event from soup to nuts. So the first thing we do is we need to control who can create live events. And the best way to do this is through live events policies. So these are in the Teams Admin Center, and you can basically configure some very basic settings. Now, what I recommend is that you have 2 live events policies and you turn off live events in your global default policy. A lot's going to depend on how you apply meeting policies and Teams policies to your end users. But if you have the global default and have live events turned off, and then have public allowed, and there's global, there's the internal events and public allowed. So these are the 3 types of permissions. We're going a bit more in depth in those in a second. The way we can apply these as well is now through the group policy assignment, and this is fairly new to Teams. I quite like this. Traditionally you had to go to a user, you had to apply the policy directly. But what we can now do is we can assign a policy to an Office 365 group. So you can set up a nice AD group, put your public events users in that one, maybe your marketing team, put your internal events users in another one, and we can apply the policy to that group. This then is taken into account in the Teams platform, and you can see here that Billy's got an internal events only license, even though she did have public allowed from the groups, and that's because that policy has been assigned directly. So the rule is direct assignment wins over everything. Group assignment, and you can have the ability to rank your group assignment, so a higher rank will win over a lower rank, and then finally the default. So if there's no group and there's no direct assignment, you'll get the group policy. That was a nice improvement. It's made changing those policies on individual users a lot easier. That means you can move it away from maybe the core IT team and put it into the hands of the service desk. So with the policies in place, we can now look at scheduling. And the key thing I called out here is that you've got to have an Exchange online mailbox to be able to schedule an Exchange Teams live event. You can't do this in Outlook. So yeah, you need to migrate that user. It's nice and easy. It's in the Teams client. You do the new meeting drop down, and you click on live event. Nice and straightforward. We get a pop-up in the client. Looks somewhat like this, and you get to choose your title. It's really key here that actually the title is what's going to be shown to your attendees when they connect to the live event. So make sure that that's in keeping with what your event's about, what you're going to send out. We then create a start and end time, and this only applies to the production meeting and the live event. So the way to think about this is you want some time at the start to set up. So think about having a green room. So you may give your producers and presenters half an hour before the actual start of the live event. So in this case, I've allowed 15 minutes. It's 11:45 is the start time. My actual published event, the event I'm going to send out to the attendees, is going to start at midday. So that gives me 15 minutes of setup. So the producer invite, the presenter invite that goes out, that will have the right time so that people join early and are all ready to go. And then the last bit is a bit of description. And again, this is only shown to the producers and the presenters. I'll come back to the adding the presenters in a second, because I want to talk about the live event permissions. So a couple of permissions here. We've got people and groups. So this is effectively internal only. So this is people who log on to your Office 365 tenant. You can't specify people with a Hotmail address, for instance, or anything like that. It's got to be in your tenant. But this allows you to make sure that you're only selecting certain people within your organization and giving them permissions to connect. The next one is org-wide. And this is basically anyone who logs on to your tenant with a tenant identifier, they can connect to the event. And then the last one is public, and this is effectively a public anonymous connection. So this is one of the first failings of Teams live events for me. And it's really around people like the marketing team, because they say, you know, we want to set up a live event, but we want to capture information about the attendees. So we can set up an Eventbrite connection. We can capture information through Eventbrite, but what we can't do is we can't tie who registered to who attended easily. We do get an attendee download, a list of everyone who attended, but the problem is when you connect to public anonymous, you can choose to remain anonymous when you connect. So there's this kind of disconnect, and hopefully some of the webinar registration facilities that are coming, that again we'll talk about at the end, are going to start to address that side. The last thing we need to set up is the Teams permissions. So we talk about whether the recording is going to be available to the attendees. We're going to talk about whether captions are going to be available. And now we can pick up to 6 languages. So you can turn on, as an attendee, you can turn on the closed captioning, and you can choose from the 6 languages that I've picked as the organizer. And amazingly, Klingon is one of them. It just looks crazy. I don't profess to speak Klingon at all. But it's interesting. Someone did say, why did the Teams team spend time working on Klingon? Just to point out that Teams actually had nothing to do with this. This is using the AI-driven language capabilities of Azure. So Teams are just plugging into that. So although you can pick 6 languages, there's something like 66 odd languages to choose from, which is quite amazing. You can allow the attendee engagement report. That's only available to your internals. And the last one is Q&A. Now, by default, this is not ticked. Now, the problem with this is if we start our live event and we suddenly realize, oh, I didn't turn on Q&A. Once the producer's in the event, you can't go and change this. So you can't change it after the fact once the event started. So I would always recommend you turn on Q&A, because you can always then disable it in the event if you decide you don't want to use it. So the last bit that comes up around scheduling is the invite for the attendees. Now, this attendee link is different when you're using a public anonymous, but it's the same when you're using internal. And this is really where I talked about having a separate invite for your attendees. So this might be published on a web page. It might be sent out through an Eventbrite mail list. But basically, this is a Teams endpoint that anyone that's got that link can connect to. And that's a key thing here, is that if it's a public anonymous, anyone with the link can join. So if you're paying, or if people are paying for a ticket and you send it to one person, they can buy one ticket and then they can send the URL to all their friends and they can join. So just be aware of that. And I would say that this link is horrible. It's around 250 odd characters long. So it's just, in fact, it might be slightly longer than you can put in a link in a SharePoint list, because I remember someone complaining about that on the forums just last week. So I would always recommend that you use a URL shortener service. One of the benefits here is it abstracts that Teams URL away from what you're sharing with the attendees. So if there's a problem with the URL, if you have to reschedule or change the URL at any point, it allows you to make a change to that shortener. That also helps if someone ends the event early, and that can happen if you're running an event all day, someone accidentally hits stop, you've used up that live event URL, it's gone, and you have to have a new one. So we've set up scheduling, we've got our event all nicely, so now we can turn to the presenters and the producers. And frankly, this is where Teams falls down big time. The experience is just hard work. So let's have a quick look at our producer and event here. So I'm in my company, Wolf Consulting. So I'm the producer, and I've invited a few people from outside. So when we jump to this first one, So the testing live accounts was a Teams free user that I set up. So the key thing here is the Teams free tenant needs around 48 hours. So if you suddenly realize at the last minute that you can't get this person in, they can't just go and set up a Teams free account, because it takes around 24 hours before you can invite them as a guest to a team. And then after you've invited them to a guest, as a guest to a team, and they've accepted the B2B invite, then they get the tenant switch option appear. And they've got to be able to sign into the Teams client and select your tenant to be able to join the event. Confusing, I know. So if you look at any of the guest presentation documents from Microsoft, basically it says everyone has to be invited to a team first and then invited to the event. Unfortunately for the end users, that's just not very clear, because if I just go back quickly to the previous page, it's on the edit page, but you just get an email box that says, right, invite your presenters. Nothing to the end user says this isn't going to work. So this is very much an education role. The other thing is that Teams free users and guest users are not licensed for the producer role. So if you want them to be a producer, you've either got to give them a log on to your tenant, or you've got to license their guest user. It will let them into the producer role, but you're not compliant. So the other guests there, Yahoo email addresses, Hotmail addresses, these will work. But again, you've got to go through this Azure B2B process. You've got to invite them to a team. They've got to be able to sign on to the Teams client and switch to your tenant. If they can't do that, they will not be able to present. They'll go to connect, and all they'll get is, hey, the live event hasn't started. Basically, it will connect them as an attendee. And again, they're not licensed for the user role, producer role. So the third type of external guest is someone who's licensed user from another organization. So this for me is someone who's got their own tenant, they've got Teams, they're licensed with either E1 to E5 or A3 to A5. A1 isn't licensed and won't work. And these guys can perform the producer role. They can just connect. They don't need to tenant switch. They can just literally click the link and join, and it works lovely. If everyone who's a presenter or a producer is going to have their own tenant, their own Teams tenant, and their own license, it will just work beautifully. The problem is that when we talk about live events, and especially for events like this, you can't guarantee that every speaker is going to have. Actually, I kind of hope that every speaker here would have a Microsoft Teams 365 subscription, but other live events, you can't guarantee that every speaker is. One of the live events I was doing for the client had a stand-up comedian presenting to do some morale boosting, and he basically needed to join with his Gmail. So not a problem. We'll invite the Gmail account into the guest, and this is where we started to hit problems, because InfoSec don't like guests with Gmail account in this client. In fact, they won't let you invite anyone with a non-commercial email address. So if you've got a consumer Hotmail or consumeroutlook.com, InfoSec won't allow it. So this is one of the things that's driven some of those users back to WebEx. And this is something that, I've had some quite good conversations with the team at Microsoft about, and some of the things we're going to talk about from Ignite will hopefully address that. So on to the live event. We've scheduled it. So preparing for it. Now, practice makes perfect. I would say you definitely need to log in, play with the producer role, set up some test live events, play with the presenter role, and understand each other's roles. Have some test runs. Don't expect to just start your first live event and run with it. I guarantee you'll get people talking over, sharing at the wrong time, things like that. So a top tip here is, if you use your pre-scheduled live event for the practice, make sure you do not go live. Now, the buttons that you get under the producer view is send live and start. Send live is good. Start is bad. Start actually starts your live event. And if you do that on the wrong day and then stop it, you will have to reschedule the whole event and change that attendee URL. I have had clients do it. So if you see this pop up and it's not the right time, don't hit continue. So during the live event, again, producers and presenters must be in the Teams client. I've probably said that 3 times now. And every training course I do with clients, I say it 3 times, because it's amazing how people go, I can't connect. Should I use Chrome? And no mobile, no web. The only other option you have is also the audio bridge. So if you've got audio conferencing turned on and the organizer has the audio conference license, then you will get an audio bridge in the backstage meeting, and you can use that to bring attendees in as an audio only participant. So that takes us into our setup phase. So on the day of event, we set up, and I call this the green room, and this is before we go live. So attendees can't see or hear anything. In fact, if an attendee connects, all they'll get is the live event hasn't started. And I recommend at least a 15-minute setup period to give you time to get everyone working. A few minutes before the end, it's worth getting everyone to basically shut up, mute the microphones, and basically lay out some ground rules just before you start. So at the point where you hit pre-live and you hit start, that will change, that will go red. So you just need to remind everyone, mute your microphones, and remind your slide sharers and people, especially if they're swapping sharing, make sure they share at the appropriate time. One of the things that we can't control as a producer is which content is shown to the stream. So if we have speaker A is sharing, and speaker B is getting ready and goes, oh, I'm going to hit share, it will take over the stream without you having any control. So again, remind your speakers and slide sharers, wait until the proper time. At the point where you're ready to go live, it's worth having, maybe going live a couple of minutes early before your session's going to start. So I try and go early, about 2 minutes early. We have a little holding slide. The live event will begin shortly. And what I tend to do is I embed this in the slide deck with a static page first, and then a second page that actually has the music connected to it. And what this allows me to do is it allows me to hit go live, wait for the stream to go live, wait for the red, and then advance the slide and have the music start. And that way we don't just have this music suddenly go blam and coming on and scaring everyone. So if you've got a fade in, that comes up nicely. So again, going live, I'm going to skip forward a little bit because we're running a bit low on time, and I've still got the video and stuff to go through. So you will notice that the pre-live and live buttons change. Everyone gets a red line, and just shows them quite clearly. And then when we get to the end of the show, I recommend having an outro slide. Provide a way for feedback to come in. So whether that's through a Microsoft form, so this is a Microsoft form embedded, clicking the end live event, you can see the live event has ended, and that will then basically cut off anyone who's watching the stream. And again, only end the event when you're 100% finished with it. And at the end of that, you'll get the ended tab. So where you've had pre-live, live, it'll be ended. At the end of the event, there's a number of resources available to you, and they're available through the calendar invite, either in Teams or in Outlook. And you'll have basically the video recording, the Q&A report, the attendee report. So the Q&A report and the attendee report are both CSV files, and they have every question that was asked, whether it was published, ignored. And you'll also have the transcript for the languages that you've selected. Below the fold, I'm not showing on this, there is also a backup video recording, because for some reason, sometimes the first one doesn't work, and it doesn't capture a video, or it misses some of the audio. So the second one is always there and available. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play a video. Now, this has got some audio on it. I'm not sure how this is going to work. I'm going to unmute the stream. If we start getting feedback, I'll mute it again, and I'll talk through what's happening. I will talk through with some comments on this as well. So this is an event that we've set up. You can see in the top left there the producer view, and Tracy van der Skaaff very kindly helped me with this, and connected from South Africa, and we're just having a little chat before we start. And you can see in the bottom right at the moment the attendees joining through the browser. So I'm just chatting to Tracy, and we're just reminding everyone else in the team that we're about to go live. So I'm sending the slides to live first, and then I've started the event. And that's really key, is you've got to make sure you're sending some content before you start. You can see that our slide wrangler in the top right now, their tag's gone live, the music started. But what you will notice is that the attendee is not seeing any of this yet. And again, this is that 20 to 30 second delay. So the music's playing. This is just some nice free music that came with Camtasia. It's royalty free, so you can use it. And now the live event started for the attendee. So it was around a 20-second delay there. So I'm going to now skip ahead. We let music run for about 2 minutes. And then I'm going to just run in with a little bit of an introduction. And I tend to always start my live events just telling the users what they can do with some of the attendee controls. So you can pause, you can change where you are in the live event, you can click the live button to come back to it. Now, if you're familiar with using Netflix or YouTube for live events, it works in exactly the same way. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So there you go. This is me just talking through the slides. Through a few of the attendee controls that you can use while you're viewing. If you look across the toolbar, you'll see that you can pause, rewind, change your volume, and at any point, click on the live button to return to the live performance. Now, when I finish this preamble, I've already instructed Tracy to just start sharing. And what you'll see is you'll see that those slides, her slides will just switch in. Me as a producer haven't had to do anything. The only thing I am going to do is I'm going to change the view from single content view to content and camera. So very similar to what you're looking at now. We're going to be the same in Teams Live events. I'd like to hand over to our correspondent all the way from Johannesburg, Tracy van der Skeef. Thank you very much for coming today. And I shall hand over to you. So there's the camera switch happening.
Absolutely, Paul. How amazing to be here with you.
There we go. And you can see that Tracy just started sharing and her slides took over. And again, notice the attendees still 20 seconds behind. They could, if they want, go back. They can't go forward in the stream. They're only going to be able to hit the live point, which for them is around 20 seconds behind. So any second now, we're going to see the attendees link flick over as well.
Which, of course, is co-innovation. Talking about the Office 365 apps and services, of course, Microsoft Teams is a big.
There we go. So we've seen the slide switch in. So after Tracy's really wonderful session, I really recommend Tracy as a speaker as well. She's great to listen to. We're now in the kind of the end of her session. She's handing off. And we're going to switch back to the outro slides.
End of my session, and this has been such an incredible thing to be on this call with you and to share these great things. I'm just a crazy South African chick.
So I'm getting ready to go back to content only view at this point.
Everyone who does. And it's been an absolute honor for me to be part of this with you.
That's been awesome. And you can see that the slide wrangler is ready to share. And she's getting a warning now. That's a really nice improvement that Microsoft have put in that says you're about to share and take over from another person. So it helps to stop some of that issue. So there's our outro slide going out. Tell us how we did, how you enjoyed the event. That's brilliant. But other than that, thank you everyone who's taken part. Thank you very much, Tracy, all the way from South Africa. And we shall bid you all good night. And this is the point we're in now. At the point where you hit that live event and that goes to ended, you can now speak freely. Attendees can't hear you. Awesome. So I can say goodnight. Everyone can disconnect. And you'll notice that, again, the attendee stream is just happening. They're watching to the end. And how you enjoyed the event. That's brilliant. But other than that, thank you everyone who's taken part. Thank you very much, Tracy, all the way from South Africa. And we shall bid you all good night. Okay. And now we get the live event has ended pop up. There we go. So that's pretty much, let me just turn off the audio from the screen. So that's pretty much the event from start to finish. Obviously, that can be a 16-hour mammoth event if you want, if you've got the right license. But it's an interesting experience to be part of. So I've got a few top tips that I want to share for our presenters. When it'll change, there we go. So a couple of things. Put yourself in the best light. You know, don't have a window behind you or a light behind you. Your face is going to be in shade. If you can use an artificial light for control, then brilliant. You know, not everyone has to. I've bought myself a nice expensive Elgato Stream Deck light that I can control my stream. You know, I can make it really bright. I can play around. You know, it's great. You don't need to have that. Just make sure that, you know, you've got some form of light. I mean, if need be, put tin foil on the wall behind you to reflect the light from the ceiling. Just make sure your face isn't in shadow. Curate your background. So live events doesn't allow for blur background. So on top of the shelf unit behind me is some of my really nice wood turnings. They weren't there this morning. There was a big pile of crap. It was all rubbish and horrible. So I had to have a bit of a tidy up. I haven't bothered in the last week because I've been using just meetings. So I've just been doing blur background and stuff like that with clients. But we can't do that in live events yet. So bear that in mind. And use more than one monitor. The amount of people I know that are trying to do team meetings and share, and they've just got their laptop device. You know, monitors aren't horrendously expensive. Have a second one for at home. It will make it so much more easier. One thing I just wanted to touch on as well is advanced production scenarios. I'm not going to go in any depth at all about this. There's a really popular bit of software called Open Broadcast Studio, and it's spelled properly, OBS. It allows you to do things like custom layouts. So we can have proper picture-in-picture. You can have side-by-side browsers. I use this quite regularly when I'm demonstrating things like multi-authoring, where I can show two different people logged into the document to a client. I've got my camera in the middle. Some of the changes we're going to talk about in a minute will maybe do away with some of what you can do with OBS, but it does give you a nice professional sort of approach, and it works well with devices like Stream Decks, as you can see, to change those camera views very quickly. So if you're running an event on your own, actually that makes some really nice smooth transitions. So that's left us about 8 minutes now to just talk about some of the things that have come out of Ignite. Now, for me, I think Ignite really represented a big shift in the virtual event experience. So the first change is that they're going to simplify virtual events. Teams meetings and live events, they're going to come together. And this is Microsoft's wording straight from Ignite, coming together to simplify event setup and delivery, provide more customization options, and support structured participation. And what they're effectively doing is saying, we want one tool, regardless of whether it's a 2-person call, a 5-person meeting, a 500-person internal town hall, or a webinar to 20,000 in the public. So again, they're looking at changing how the meetings scale. They're looking at things like so what you can see here is the registration pages that are coming. So you'll have the ability to set up these nice branded design webinar, branded pages, to collect information, to capture that during registration, to handle things like the email confirmations to registered attendees, and customization. I love Microsoft saying that, customize outreach to put your best foot forward, which I'm translating as Microsoft speak for branding. So that the registration piece, I'm really looking forward to. I think that's going to answer a lot of questions for people like the marketing team and the clients that I'm working with. For them, they see this as the biggest disconnect really between live events. I can foresee some questions around things like GDPR, but given the focus that Microsoft has, then I think they'll be up on that. So the structure and the control and the roles. So this is going to be quite interesting, how we can play with some of the similar to how we would do this in OBS. We've got these dynamic views coming where we'll be able to pin and showcase particular speakers, show the structure. We've got the view only option. Now, some of these have already hit the tenants, and we'll talk about those in a second. But things like the view only, being able to mute people, that's in the tenant already, in the majority of tenants now. Or hard mute, as they're calling it. And some really nice design structures for some of these meetings. So it'll be interesting to see what those are like when they hit. So again, these view controls, so managed layouts. I'm kind of hoping that we're going to have the ability to maybe customize these, because one of the big asks is always, can we have 2 or 3 key speakers visible, maybe over the content? So I quite like the newsreader style that they're showing. But it'll be interesting to see what layouts we have available. So again, that's an area that I'm watching keenly. And analytics. So again, there's no point collecting all this information and capturing data like that if we can't do anything with it. So currently the intention is that data will be able to be downloaded and analyzed in either Excel or a third-party CRM system. I'm guessing that we'll be able to pull it into Power BI. It would be nice to see how much automation we can do. Can we capture these automatically when an event finishes, push it through Flow, Power Automate into BI, things like that. So yeah, that's going to be quite interesting. So a few things we talked about at Ignite. So Spotlight, it's already in our tenants. We can spotlight a speaker today. The content layout options, they're coming. Disable chat hasn't hit yet. The disable chat's going to be really key for those ones where you don't want people to engage via the text chat. Scale and structure, the 1,000-person meeting, 20,000 viewer only attendees, these are all coming. Breakout rooms are in the process of being rolled out. I know they've been delayed. They were originally due by the end of October, but they've been pushed back to the end of November now. Registration and email automation, I believe, is going to be Q1 now. And things like hard mute has already hit. The engagement report, that hit a couple of months ago. They're changing now. That will actually be delivered into the meeting chat for the organizer. And then some of the things like the analytics and the network monitoring, that's coming. We've already got a certain amount of things like network monitoring in live events. So seeing some of that come into Teams meetings will be really useful. And then things like polls, you can't do polls in live events. So as we merge this behavior into Teams meetings and live events into a single behavior experience, being able to use those message extensions and some of the other development things that were mentioned about Ignite. So, being able to pull in the CRM system and interact directly with that whilst in the meeting, that's going to be quite interesting. So I appreciate that, we're kind of in this state of flux now. Where are we with live events? Where are we with Teams meetings? And I see this session changing heavily over the next few months, and it's going to move to the evolution of large events. So for now, I've put together a slide with some resources, and we'll be sharing this later. So some best practices for producing a live event. That's a Microsoft doc. A really interesting article by Addis Jugo, who is one of the team of organisers of the Collab Summit, who are one of our sponsors today. And they did a virtual conference earlier this year when the event in Wiesbaden had to be cancelled. And he goes in some real depth about how they can use virtual machines using OBS and things like that. That's a really good read if you're really interested in some of the advanced scenarios. And there's a few more here about including the link from Ignite. And if you are interested in using the OBS software and getting really into some depth with that, then Daryl Webster's done a really good YouTube post, which I've linked there as well, about how to use OBS. And that was really useful. I found that great. So that's pretty much the end of the session. Let's have a look and see if we've got any comments. So yes, that's a really good point about you can check if the domain you invited has a tenant. One problem it doesn't do is it doesn't tell you if they're licensed for Teams. And that's the key thing, is they do have to be licensed and able to sign into Teams. But that's a really good point. And it's a great way of at least engaging with your users and saying, I think you'll find it's people like the marketing team, the people that are going to be doing these events quite a lot. They'll probably be a little bit more up on doing that. The average user is going, oh, let's play with a live event. They're not going to get it. So, yeah, no, that's a really good tip. So thank you, whoever WSS is. Yep. So at that point, are there any other questions? Have I missed any, Thomas?
I don't think so. No. I missed the tip. Well, I saw your tip on not presenting in front of a window, so that's a little bit of a problem here.
It's a bit difficult.
Yeah, I don't have proper lighting here. So, but yeah, but I got that part. All right. I don't think there were any other questions. I checked twice. So, well, anyhow, if attendees might have additional questions afterwards or in a few minutes, I'm sure. I'm sure. Paul, yeah,
pop them in the channel, and I'll happily pick them up. And likewise, reach out to me on Twitter or anywhere. I'm more than happy to engage with people.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed your session. I am sure the audience did too. And yeah, thanks for presenting at our conference.
It's always a pleasure. I wouldn't miss it.
And hopefully we'll see each other soon. All right. Thank you. Bye.
The Omita framework is an enterprise-ready software platform that makes it possible to set up an easy integration between your existing back-office applications and push all the relevant information into digital workplaces. Omita has developed various kinds of solutions which can be easily deployed and linked to your back-office applications. Omita has solutions for contract management, HR to speed up onboarding and offboarding processes, sales dashboards, shop floor portals, and many more. If you want more information, visit our website.